From the banks of the Colorado River in Lake Mead to the homes and businesses in Southern Nevada, welcome to Water Smarts, the podcast pumping from the heart of Las Vegas, where we engage with the experts who keep the water flowing throughout Southern Nevada. I'm Bronson Mack.
And I'm Crystal Zelke. From how we treat it, deliver it, use it, protect it, and conserve it, the Water Smarts podcast is all about water in Southern Nevada. We hope to make you a little smarter about the one thing that keeps us all connected: water.
Hey, Crystal, how are you today?
Well, I'm doing good. You know why?
Oh, let me guess. Because we're closing out the days of summer. Is that why?
How would you know that? Do I talk about it a lot or something?
It is so crazy. I mean, look, you and I grew up here. We both are familiar with the fact that we have really two seasons in Southern Nevada. We've got hot and we've got cold, and not a lot in between. But we do get a couple of weeks where things do cool off a little bit. And it's important that we're taking advantage of those, especially when you consider the fact that that's the time when we need to do some things when it comes to conservation, right?
Yes. So if you haven't done it yet, you need to get outside in your garage or wherever your watering clock is. You need to make sure it's set to no more than 3 days a week. You could probably get by even a little less if you just have desert adapted plants. You know, if everybody changed their clock here in the valley with every season, we would save billions of gallons of water each year.
It's crazy to think that just that simple act of one person going out and changing that sprinkler clock at each home, right? Because look, we're a community of 2.3 million people. If you've ever flown into the Las Vegas Valley on an airplane and looked out the window as you're coming into this valley, you notice a little sliver of the Las Vegas Strip, but then everything to the east and west of that is all rooftops, and residents use the most water throughout our community. So if we can all make the commitment to change that sprinkler clock 4 times a year, go out to that garage, or like you said, wherever your watering clock is, know your assigned watering days too, because we are in fall. So everybody has 3 assigned watering days. You want to make sure your sprinkler clock is set to only those 3 days. And like you said, those drip systems on your trees and on your plants can actually run a little bit less. You know, those flowering plants that benefit the pollinators like the bees and the hummingbirds, and then those trees that are providing shade for your property. Obviously, you want to keep them healthy. And a lot of those plants do better with even less water. And one of the places where you can actually go and learn a little bit more of kind of our native environment, obviously you've got the Springs Preserve, but we're going to be talking a little bit today about the Warm Springs Natural Area, because the Warm Springs Natural Area is a really unique property here in Southern Nevada. It's not too far away from our valley, and it is just a beautiful and historic place, and it plays an important part in our water story for our community. And today, to explain why this oasis in the desert plays such an important role in our water resources, we have with us Zane Marshall, Director of Water Resources for the Southern Nevada Water Authority. Zane, welcome to the Water Smarts podcast.
Thank you, Crystal and Bronson. I'm really happy to be here today.
We really appreciate your time, Zane. You know, obviously, you spend some time out there at the Warm Springs Natural Area, and you know, the Water Authority acquired that property in 2007. And as a regional water agency, SNWA is really kind of best known for planning and securing water resources for our community and protecting our water supply, promoting water conservation. But as the owner and operator of the Warm Springs Natural Area, SNWA also oversees the management of land at Warm Springs and has been doing a lot of work to restore some of those native springs that provide benefit to wildlife, especially for that endangered Moapa dace, which we'll talk about, a very important fish and a very interesting fish too. But before we get into the history of the springs and start talking about the dace, can you just explain a little bit about where the Warm Springs Natural Area is located and why SNWA is managing this environmentally sensitive place?
Sure. Thanks, Bronson. So the Warm Springs Natural Area is located about an hour north of downtown Las Vegas along I-15, just off of Highway 168 and the Warm Springs Road. It's about an hour from downtown Las Vegas. The property is 1,220 acres. And it contains 5 major spring complexes with over 24 springs that are the headwaters of the Muddy River. So the water comes from the regional aquifer, and it flows into a number of tributaries that flow into the Muddy River. And from the Muddy River, that water flows into Lake Mead, which is the source of 90% of our water supply here in Southern Nevada. When the property became available to us from private owners, the Water Authority worked to acquire the property. We were able to obtain funds from the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act to make the purchase. And the primary reason why the Water Authority made that purchase and manages the property today is because we work to protect and manage the water resources that flow from that property and down the Muddy River and into Lake Mead. And we also work to protect the important cultural and natural resources that are present on that 1,220 acres. And the protection of those natural and historic resources are directly linked to our long-term critical water resources and water supplies for Southern Nevada.
The Springs area has such a rich history that's so interesting, especially to the locals here in Las Vegas. The Southern Paiute people and their ancestors lived in the Moapa Valley for thousands of years. Then around about 1776, Spanish explorers made their way through the region and established the Spanish Trail connecting Santa Fe, New Mexico to Los Angeles. Some of the first Euro-Americans to live in the area were Mormon settlers, and anyone who lived here in the 60s and 70s may have gone out to the springs to swim in the warm springs under the palm trees. I know our producer, Lisa Story, has some photos of her family out there. Can you tell us a little bit about the area's history and any other interesting facts our listeners might find amusing about the area?
So the cultural and historic resources on the Warm Springs are a focus of some of our management out there. And it's because the Warm Springs Natural Area has been an oasis in the desert for thousands of years. And people have used that oasis for much of that time. So archaeologists have found cultural resources out there that show that there's been prehistoric homes and rock shelters, and there are artifacts that they found as well, including a radiocarbon dating that shows farming has been conducted out there for over 2,000 years by Native Americans. And as you noted, the Spanish Trail passed about 8 miles to the southeast of the area. And archaeologists believe that the Spring Rock Shelter was located in a site that was used by Paiutes to actually escape the Spanish that used that trail in the area. There's also some interesting history about the site where it was used by outlaws. So an outlaw named Alexander Dry used the Warm Springs area to hide and raise stolen cattle. And he was the first cattle rancher in the area. And then during the mid-1800s, Mormon settlers built corrals and irrigation canals and fences and homes to use the area. There is some of that evidence that's still left there today, and we have preserved that as part of our management of the property. Francis Taylor bought 2 large ranches and some smaller parcels in 1950 and renamed the area the Warm Springs Ranch. And then later in 1971, Howard Hughes bought the ranch and used it for his business and personal purposes until his death, when the Church of Latter-day Saints bought the property. And then, like you and Bronson have said, in 2007, the Southern Nevada Water Authority purchased the property using those Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act funds and developed a portion of the property for public use and opened that area for public use in 2017.
Wow, Zane, that's actually a really cool history associated with one single property. I mean, you mentioned the Southern Paiutes, right? So the native people of this region centuries ago were out there at the property. The Mormon settlers that you've talked about, there's obviously a very high population of Mormons here in Southern Nevada. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they traveled down south from Utah and they sort of settled out in some of those areas known like Logandale and Overton. And in fact, kind of that direction you gave us here at the beginning of where the Warm Springs Natural Area is located, it's right up there in that Logandale, Overton area as well. So it's just really interesting to think that a property just an hour outside of Las Vegas really has a lot of history and cultural significance to this valley and where we all call home.
That's right, Bronson. I think some of the historical aspects of the property are some of the most interesting. And I would really encourage folks to go out and visit the property. Before they do, I would recommend that they visit the website. The address to the website is warmspringsnv.org. because you don't want to make a trip out there and have the property closed. We open the property in early September and close it in late May. It's typically open Tuesday through Sunday from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. and closed on holidays. And there are a lot of things to do out on the property in that public use area that I mentioned earlier, like observe some of the historical and cultural artifacts that we have displayed on the property. We have some interpretation on a trail that we've developed out there that's just under a mile long. And the trail is improved for those folks that may have some mobility issues. And so we tried to make that portion of the property accessible. But folks can go out there and look at some of these thermal springs. We have a couple of observation decks where they can look over the spring. We don't allow swimming because of the sensitive biological resources that are in those springs, like the Moapa Dace that you mentioned earlier. But folks can visit, they can picnic, there are bathrooms and a parking area. And like I said, they can learn about the cultural resources, the history, and the biology that's out there. The biology, since I'm a biologist, is really interesting to me because there are 28 sensitive species that live on the property that utilize those warm springs and the unique habitats around them. And my fellow biologists have observed over 200 species of birds that use the property as well. That's one of my favorite activities is to bird watch. And I know that a number of my friends from the Audubon Society visit the property pretty regularly to watch birds. So it's a great place for all of those activities.
Zane, you just mentioned that the sensitive species and 200 species of birds, which is great for bird watchers to check out. Tell us a little more about the endangered and sensitive species at the Warm Springs Natural Area. Why are they important to our ecosystem?
Like I said, 28 endangered, threatened, and sensitive species that occur in the Warm Springs area. And it's really because of the warm water and the tributaries and the main stem and all of the vegetation and habitats that occur around those springs is why those species are there. And some of them include birds like the western yellow-billed cuckoo and the southwestern willow flycatcher, which are birds that are neotropical migrants. They winter in Central and South America and migrate to the southwest to nest and have their young, and then they migrate back to Central and South America during the fall. So they use the Warm Springs Natural Area and those trees and vegetation around the springs to nest in. We also have species like the Virgin River chub, which primarily uses the main stem of the Muddy River. And then the Moapa Dace, like we've mentioned earlier, which is an endemic species. It only occurs in the upper Muddy River. That's the only place on the planet that it lives. And it's a unique fish. There are no other fish like it. And it's an important part of our natural history of the Southwest. The Moapa Dace is protected by the Endangered Species Act, but it's an important part of this unique ecosystem as well. We have a number of other species, like I mentioned, those 28, which include unique spring snails, an aquatic bug called a necorid, several species of other invertebrates that are unique to the area. The Moapa Dace has an interesting history because it is one of the first species that was added to the Endangered Species Act for its protection in 1967. And the Moapa National Wildlife Refuge that is across the street from the Warm Springs Natural Area was established for the purpose of protecting the Moapa Dace. So all of these species together in this kind of small area on the headwaters of the Muddy River are an important collection of animals and insects that, again, are an important part of our natural history and the Southwest. And these places where there are aquatic environments, where there are unique fish and insects and plants, make our home more interesting and exciting to live in and to visit when we can.
Be a water smart hero. Save money using smart technology. Investing in a smart irrigation controller is now easier than ever, thanks to the Southern Nevada Water Authority's rebate, which offers 50% off the purchase price up to $100 to help you out. The smart irrigation controller adjusts your yard's watering schedule in accordance with the weather. So when it rains, your smart controller will do all the work and adjust your landscape watering accordingly. And you can control it all from your smartphone, making it easier to change your watering schedule and follow Southern Nevada's seasonal watering restrictions. Be water smart and update your irrigation controller today and start saving water and money. Details are available at snwa.com.
So, Zane, you're actually quite familiar with the Moapa Dace on a very personal level. I believe one of your first jobs when you started working for the Water Authority was to snorkel in the streams and count the fish. Give our listeners some background on your research and experience, and also paint a picture of how exactly does the SNWA track the health of the dace species? I mean, how do you count all those fish?
Right. So when I started my career here at the Water Authority, a little over 26 years ago, I was a new environmental biologist. I just graduated school. And one of my first jobs was to help with the population monitoring of the Moapa dace. We do this with a cooperative effort with Nevada Department of Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so there's a team of biologists that get together twice a year, and they snorkel all of the sections of Main Stem Muddy River and the tributaries that the Moapa dace occurs in to make direct counts by observing these fish in their habitat. So we dress up in wetsuits and booties to protect our bodies from the rocks and sticks and things that are in the streams. And we wear a mask and snorkel. And we crawl through and sometimes swim through sections of the stream and count these fish as we see them in their habitats. As you can imagine, it is extremely physically demanding because you're doing push-ups and essentially the worm and swimming through these streams that are in some cases just inches deep or in some cases several feet deep for 8 or 9 hours during a day. And we do this over 2 days, the total population count. And we count every fish that we can find, and we classify them by size or age. We count the larvae, the young fish, and the adult fish. And we know that this is a pretty accurate approach to counting because we've used another statistical method, which is called mark and recapture, to evaluate the numbers that we get with the direct observation. It's interesting. It's kind of a fun way to count the fish, but again, it's very physically demanding. And we have some very dedicated folks that they get together, like I said, twice a year to do these population counts. And the information that we collect with that includes the population number for Moapa dace over time. So we have a couple of decades, at least, of population data for the Moapa dace, so we know how their population changes over time. But we also have information on other fish that occur in the system, including the White River springfish, which is another native fish in the system, and a couple of non-native species of fish that occur there as well. One is the molly and the other is the mosquito fish. Prior to about 2013, we also had blue tilapia in the system, which was a non-native species that predated or preyed on Moapa dace. And Nevada Department of Wildlife, Fish and Wildlife Service, and SNWA spent a number of years working to remove tilapia out of the system because of its impact on Moapa dace. So those surveys helped us to track those numbers of non-native fish and finally determine that we were successful in removing tilapia out of the system. We get, like I said, good numbers. We track them from one year to the next. And most recently, we've counted over 2,400 Moapa dace in the system, which is a significant improvement over previous years. And I can tell you more about what we've done to benefit Moapa dace if you're interested.
Yeah, I think we'd actually like to hear a little bit about kind of some of the things that you're doing to help protect and benefit the dace. But before we do that, Zane, I have to assume our listeners may not be real familiar with what the dace looks like. I mean, certainly we have listeners that are out there that like to fish like I do. They're probably going after the lunkers, trying to get a couple of trout on the line, maybe a couple of bass. You mentioned tilapia. So I think our listeners are pretty familiar with fish of that size and that type. But the dace is a little bit different than those types of fish. It's not exactly the kind of fish that you're going to get on the end of your line. Can you just describe a little bit about this dace? What's it look like? Is it big? Is it small? Help our listeners understand that a bit.
Right. So like many of the unique desert fishes that we have in the Mojave and Great Basin deserts, the Moapa dace is a relatively small fish. It's in the minnow family. A large adult can be about 3 to 4 inches long. They are light brown in color with a large spot on the end of the tail just above the tail fin. And they have a highly forked tail fin, which makes them easily identifiable when we're doing these snorkeling surveys in the system. So they're a unique looking fish. There's no other fish that looks like them. And their behavior is kind of interesting. They have a behavior that is similar to like a trout. They face upstream in a section of the stream that has current in it, and they'll sit about mid-water in the stream and pick out insects and debris and biological material. These are food items that are coming down the stream. Their behavior is something that, as a biologist, when we're doing the surveys, we don't even have to really focus on what the fish looks like, because we know that behavior is really specific to the Moapa dace.
That's called drift feeding, right?
That's correct. Right. Drift feeding. They, like I said, it's similar to what trout do often.
It's exciting to hear how well the dace are doing now, because I know at times the count had gotten down, and SNWA and its partners have worked really, really hard to protect the fish. Tell us some of those actions that have been taken to protect this endangered species, and how long a lifespan do these fish have?
The Moapa dace lives about 2 to 3 years. There are some that have been known to live as many as 5 years in the wild. And their life stage is, as a young fish, they live closer to these thermal spring heads. So these springs are in the range of 90 degrees Fahrenheit as the water comes out of the spring head. And the young fish like to hang out in that warmer water. And then as they mature, they can tolerate the cooler temperatures and more oxygenated water further downstream. And so the larger adult fish will use lower sections of the tributaries and the main stem. And then when it's time to spawn, the adults will come back up the tributaries and spawn near the spring heads. So when those larval fish hatch, they are in the vicinity of that warmer water. And like I said earlier, because of their feeding behavior, they select what we call runs in the stream. So these are kind of straight sections of stream that have relatively high velocity of water. And then in some cases, they'll hide behind rocks or use vegetation or logs or things like that to rest behind. And then they'll go back out into that fast water to feed. So in terms of their life history, that's the basics. And the work that we have been doing is to help them by improving the habitat. So as part of the history of the property, I mentioned that there had been work to improve the property for agricultural uses, which meant the diversion of water and changing the stream characteristics so that people could use the property for farming. Some of that was in conflict with the life history of the Moapa dace. And since we've owned the property, we have been working to restore the stream to more natural conditions and to return water that had been diverted out in diversion channels, make sure that water stayed in the stream to hold the temperature so it benefits those younger fish. We've also, in collaboration with Nevada Department of Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, have been working for 2 decades now on removing blue tilapia. So NDOW was really took the lead on that, and the Water Authority helps. They built a number of fish barriers in the tributaries and the main stem, and then worked through a number of measures to remove blue tilapia out of the system, which by about 2018, 2019 is when they were completely done with that and had removed blue tilapia all the way down to Logandale, which is a huge success. And because of that removal of blue tilapia and the work that we've done to restore habitat on the Warm Springs Natural Area, we've seen a significant increase in the population.
Pretty impressive, Zane, to hear about all of the activities that are going on in order to protect the dace. And you had mentioned that this fish is only found in these springs. This is the only place where these fish exist in the entire world. Can you help our listeners understand a little bit about why is it important to protect this species or any other threatened and endangered species? I mean, I have to assume some of our listeners are going, this is Darwinism, survival of the fittest kind of a thing. But, there is a human component to this as well. So just from a biologist standpoint, can you just help us understand why this type of effort is important?
Bronson, I think there's a couple aspects of this that are important for folks to consider. So one is that the Moapa dace is protected by this federal law, the Endangered Species Act. And it is a priority 1 species because of its uniqueness and the small nature of its habitat and the sensitivity of the total species. And the Warm Springs and Muddy River area are important to our water resource portfolio. So by working to improve the status and condition of the Moapa dace, we reduce the conflict of water resource management with that species. It helps us to ensure that we are complying with federal law and protecting the natural resources that are important to our customers and the people of Southern Nevada. I think it's also important to understand that by protecting the Moapa dace, we're protecting a whole suite of species, a whole ecosystem that is unique in Southern Nevada and unique in the world, really. The Moapa dace is really more than just a single species through our protection. We're protecting all those other unique species that I mentioned earlier and their habitats. And I think that, we're better off as a community by protecting those natural resources in the ecosystems that they occur in.
I really appreciate that explanation, Zane. That level of stewardship is obviously important to what we're doing to manage water resources, as well as protecting these resources for the community as a whole. Right in our backyard here, just north of where we are, we have this beautiful property. It's got endangered species. Its habitat is being protected. And our listeners can go and see this species for themselves. You referenced this a little bit earlier, Zane, but can you talk a little bit about whether or not there are some opportunities for people who might be even interested in volunteering some of their time, more so than just going out and having a nice walk on the trail or seeing the habitat and the dace itself? Can you just talk about any volunteer opportunities there?
Sure. So as part of our stewardship of the property, we like to do outreach with the community, and our volunteer activities are an opportunity for us to teach folks about the property and offer them an opportunity to really engage that stewardship. So the first opportunity that we have is a Green Up event on October 9th. And it would be great to see folks out there, and they can sign up on the Warm Springs website at warmspringsnv.org. We also have a bird count volunteer opportunity where through the Red Rock Audubon Society, they organize Christmas bird counts around Clark County. We participate at Warm Springs in the Moapa Christmas bird count, and it's organized out of the Warm Springs natural area. That event is on January the 2nd in 2022, and folks can sign up on the Red Rock Audubon website. And I would just encourage folks to continue to check out the website on a periodic basis to look for other opportunities that we create. And again, that website is warmspringsnv.org.
That's great that there's Green Up events out there. We do the same thing at the Las Vegas Wash, usually twice a year in the spring and fall. And I've taken my kids out there and we've helped plant it. And it's always so much fun, especially in the fall. I love it because the weather's perfect. And I'm all for getting kids out into nature off their smart devices where they can learn all about our environment here in Southern Nevada. Zane, thank you for joining us today on the Water Smarts podcast and sharing your expertise about the Warm Springs natural area.
That's great. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you, Crystal and Bronson. It was good spending time with you.
Yeah, you bet, Zane. Great information. Thanks so much for joining us.
The Water Smarts podcast is brought to you by the Southern Nevada Water Authority, which reminds you to follow the mandatory seasonal watering restrictions. Have you changed your irrigation clock for the fall seasonal watering restrictions? You should only be watering 3 days a week. It's the law. Find your assigned watering days on snwa.com.
And remember, water waste investigators are out there to enforce the fall watering restrictions, particularly due to our first ever declared water shortage on the Colorado River, where we get 90% of our water supply. So avoid hefty water waste fines and make sure you're watering on the correct days and not letting that water spray or flow off of your property.
Have you noticed water waste in your neighborhood? Visit the water waste section on snwa.com to get links to your water provider's online report forms. Most of the water agencies have mobile apps you can use to quickly report the water waste on the spot. So if you live in Boulder City, Las Vegas, or Henderson, you can download each agency's mobile app for quick and easy water waste reporting.
Most of the time, the property owner doesn't even know they're wasting water. Our water waste investigators will notify the owner and give them tips on how to fix the issue, which most of them do. If not, they may receive a water waste fine.
Another great episode here on the Water Smarts podcast. I enjoy talking to people like Zane because you kind of get, they get a chance to tell us about the things that they're really passionate about. And you can hear from Zane how much he loves what he does.
I know, and his knowledge runs deep. I mean, his background in biology. Do you realize that dude did diving out at Devil's Hole at Death Valley? And he did some stuff with the pupfish out there and helping with that species. The guy's a former Marine. He's got a ton of great stories. We didn't get into all of them. We're going to have him back on. Aside from his knowledge of species and biology, he is just a super interesting guy to talk with.
Yep, he definitely is. And the Warm Springs Natural Area, I've been out there a few times. I actually grew up here. I don't remember from my childhood really going out there, but being able to work for the Water Authority and going out there and talking to different people that have history and background, I'm always very fascinated by just what's become of that property out there.
Really cool. Rich history there. It is on your way out to Logandale. If you ever been to the fairgrounds here, the Clark County Fairgrounds, you know the path to get you out to Moapa. You just take that turnoff before you get to Logandale. It's the Glendale turnoff, and then follow some signage out there to Warm Springs. We'd love to see you there. Well, that's it for this episode of Water Smarts. We hope you subscribe and listen next time, and you can send us any questions that you may have. You got questions about the DACE, you got questions about the Warm Springs Natural Area, send them our way. You can reach us at watersmarts@snwa.com or go to the SNWA website at snwa.com and click on the Contact Us page. We'll make sure to get back to you with an answer, and we may even talk about your question on the next podcast. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time here on Water Smarts.